Hey guys, Vincent back with another video for Tails Coffee. A lot of people have been asking in the comments how I brew 2 cups of coffee at the same time. Well, for me, I always suggest everybody to brew 1 at the same time, but if you really don't have time and if you really insist on brewing 2 cups at the same time, I have a solution for you, and that is the bypass. So before we get into the video, I wanted to thank everybody for all the support you've shown us. We're almost at 1,500 subscribers. So if you like our content, please leave us a like. And if you haven't already, subscribe to us. It'll actually help us grow and create even better content for you. And without further ado, let's get into the bypass. So the bypass is when you add water directly into brewed coffee. Kind of like an Americano, but not. So what the purpose of it is to actually create a crisper or more refreshing cup of coffee. You'll notice that if you look up like some of the world champions for AeroPress recipes, people do a bypass often. And that is because the AeroPress tends to have a slightly heavier texture than a pour over. And by adding a bypass, you actually get a lighter and more refreshing cup of coffee. So what does that mean? That just means if we're brewing a denser cup of pour over, like a pour over version of it, we can use a bypass to make it more crisp and refreshing. Generally though, when you're brewing a smaller cup of coffee and you're doing it within a certain amount of time, you don't have that density issue because you're not passing through as many beans, and that comes down to how long the water or how much pressure is going through the beans. However, when you're brewing a larger batch of coffee, you might run into a problem. Passing through 35 grams of beans is a lot harder than passing through 20 grams of beans. So the coffees actually come out a lot more dense when you're brewing a bigger batch. And this is where the bypass comes in. You put the bypass after you brew the 35 grams, and this way you get a crispy and refreshing cup of coffee. There are 2 main reasons why I use the bypass. The first is because I find that my cup of coffee is a little bit harsh on the acidity. By using a bypass, you can actually drop the harshness of the acidity. And so you just brew like, if your normal ratio is your 1:15, just do a 1:13 and add 2 parts water. You're gonna get a sweeter and less acidic cup of coffee. The second time is when I brew a large and super dense cup of coffee. And that all comes down to a ratio thing and passing through a lot of beans. So buckle your seats, and I'm gonna get straight into the numbers. Let's say, for example, the standard for brewing coffee is a 1:15, and that's generally what most people use. Some people use a 1:16, but for easy numbers today, we're gonna say that the standard is a 1:15. Now for a bypass, because you're adding water directly into your coffees are actually a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit weaker than if you were to brew the whole thing all at the top. So let's say you do 30 grams of beans to 450 grams of water. If you were to brew 450 grams of water through just the dripper alone, it's going to come out stronger than if I were to do the bypass method. Having said that, when I do a bypass, my ratios drop a little bit lower. And so instead of the 1:15, I would suggest doing a 1:14. And how you determine how much of the water is a bypass, I generally stick to a 10% to a 15% amount of the total water. So if it's a 1:14 as a total brew, then you want to use about 1.5 to 2 parts water as a bypass. And so if you're using 30 grams of beans, that means you're using 45 grams of water or 60 grams of water as a bypass. Because the bypass actually makes the coffee a little bit lighter in texture, you want to change the way you brew just a little bit to create a slightly even higher density. And because you're actually filling more of the dripper up with more beans, you're actually gonna be pouring closer, which allows you to have better control of your initial agitation, which changes how it flows. So you want to pour slowly still, but because you're pouring closer, you're gonna have a denser cup naturally. And you're just gonna want to raise the temperature of your water by 1 to 2 degrees. So for this, I'm gonna be using about a 93 to 94 degree water, and we're gonna be brewing at that temperature. And because it's gonna be slower, the gas is gonna be a little bit easier to control, which allows you to have a really dense coffee without actually over extracting and over burning your coffees. So now that we've explained how the bypass works and why I use the bypass, I'm gonna show you guys how I brew a larger cup of coffee with the bypass. Hey, so now that we've set everything up, I've got the paper filter preheated, I've got the decanter preheated, I got rid of the water. We're left with the beans. This is actually 35 grams of coffee. We're going to be doing 35, and then we're doing a total ratio of a 1 to 14, so it's to 490 grams of water. But we're only doing 12 parts of water as a brew, so it's going to be to 420 grams of water, and then we're going to do a 70-gram bypass. I wanted to show everybody the grind size. It is still the same as I usually do it. It is still kind of like a medium fine grind size, if you guys were interested in this. So it looks kind of like that. I've already set the shape so you can see that there's a little divot on the middle, and we're gonna get started right away. The water right now is currently 94 degrees. We're gonna fill the kettle. This is the bigger kettle that I use. This is the Bonavita one. It's a little bit heavier, so I'm gonna fill it up halfway so I have a little bit better control of it. But essentially, we're gonna start the timer, and it's gonna start right nice and slowly in the middle. And you can see that I'm pretty close to the coffee bed just because of how much density there is. Remember, we're doing a 1 to 12, so we're pouring all the way to 420 grams. Nice and slow. You can see that there's no like uncontrolled bubbles currently. You want to stay in the middle until these darker things start to push its way out. Because there's a lot more grinds, you're gonna get a little bit of a cloud on the side. First drip, 30 seconds. Notice the first drip came out really, really late. And that will create a very dense coffee for you guys. A little bit of gas, probably because when I poured, I was shaking a little bit. But that won't affect it too much. That means there's a couple of clumps in that area that I have to break down, especially when I'm stirring. You can see we're at 250 grams and it's been a minute, so I haven't even finished pouring my water yet. We're aiming for 420. Notice all the darker stuff is already at the sides. We're gonna get right up to the edges, do a quick flush, and we're going to pour and finish. Notice how I didn't put any speed into it. It's nice and slow. 417, close enough for the video. We're gonna stir from the top all the way back down to the middle. There doesn't seem to be a lot of clumping in my feelings. So see that there's a lot more bubbles right there. We're gonna break those up, give it another second stir. Get everything extracted as tight as possible. Putting an extra stir in this one is not too bad of an idea just because you're getting just because this bean is okay with it and we're doing a bypass. Notice it is at a minute 50. I do try to tell people that we're aiming for just a 2-minute brew, but with the bypass and so much water, it's still not possible. So we're gonna be aiming for under 2:30, okay? Look at how that finished. We're at exactly 2:30 right now. Well, 2:32, okay. Let's get a closer look at the grinds themselves. See that shape? All the gases are in the middle, all the crema's in the middle. It looks very thick. A little bit pasty, but the timing wasn't too bad. So we're gonna go and say that this is not too bad and do the bypass to it. We're gonna set the grinds aside. And this is where the bypass actually is. You're going to add 70 grams of water directly into here. Or, well, I put 73. But yeah, that's the bypass itself. And we can now serve ourselves a nice cup of coffee. Cheers. I hope that this video shows you guys how to brew a larger cup of coffee that is nice and refreshing still. If you guys have any questions, leave it in the comments. Please hit us a like, give us a like, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.